Hi everyone, welcome to High Noon Live on LinkedIn. My name is Nikki Robotham and I'm your host today. We're going to be talking about one of the most important topics, which is boundaries and the fact that they are badass. We need to bring more boundaries into our lives to support a foundation of resilience and an energy that serves us. Because one of the biggest myths about boundaries is that someone else has crossed them, when in fact, we're the ones that have allowed them to be crossed. I'm an author, speaker, and an intuitive wellness coach, and I've done so much work to really help people bring more ease and resilience into their lives. My book, Embrace Your Elegant Power, really talks to this. But more importantly, I've got a fabulous guest in studio with me today. Leah Sefor, who's the author of That's Not What I Meant, is really an expert on difficult conversations and living an unapologetic life. Leah's a podcaster and author, as I mentioned, a speaker, and really has got years of experience, both in life and relationship and life coaching, helping people have difficult conversations. And boundaries are one of the most difficult conversations we can have, especially where we haven't held those boundaries for ourselves within our lives. I know personally, my boundaries often looked like scuffed chalk marks on the floor, maybe a doormat. No one knew where they were, including myself. And that's why I had to become a badass at holding boundaries in my life. So welcome, Leah. It's so great to have you in studio with us. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. I always love being here with you.
Absolutely. And so, what really led you to writing a book called That's Not What I Meant? I mean, difficult conversations, misunderstandings, miscommunications, assumptions that come through. I'm sure you've got a wealth of stories to tell us around those difficult conversations. What led you to write that book?
Well, I specialize in relationship coaching, and the fundamental kind of collapse that happens when relationships are not in a workable place is the lack of effective communication. And I'll be sitting with a couple, and this is the most common statement that they make. I said this to you, and then you heard it this way, but that's not what I meant. You misheard, you didn't understand. Yeah. So misinterpretations, misunderstandings are very, very big in communication. And understanding we all have very different views of reality. Yeah. What I see reality is not what you see reality as being. So when you're in any relationship, whether this is professional, personal, romantic, we have to understand the different versions of reality in the same room at the same time. And how are we perceiving that? How are we interpreting the dialogue, the vocabulary, the tone of voice, your body language, all of that stuff. And if you can learn that there are very specific systems of communication that will explain that to you, it makes communication flow so much easier. So that's why I wrote the book, to explain what the systems are and also to cover things like how do you have difficult conversations.
Absolutely. Because I found in so many conversations that I have with people, they're seeing it through that perception, that filter that they bring to it. And often what I say about boundaries is we've got to remember that it's both you and I. There's space for both of us. I can love you and myself at the same time. Whereas I think for so long people have thought it's you or I.
Yeah, exactly. And that boundaries are treated as quite a aggressive thing. That I've got to be quite confrontational. I've got to be quite aggro to put a boundary in place. And they don't. To confront something means simply to face it.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem with when a boundary gets violated for somebody is that they go, first of all, they have the negative reaction. You violated a boundary in my life. So whatever your negative response is going to be to that, you're angry, you're hurt, you feel rejected, you're upset. The second part that follows is that silent, passive, I don't know how to react to this. I don't know should I say something? But it happened last week. Is it not too long now? That and then you get into that passive aggressive of, but they should know that they've hurt me. They should see that they've done something wrong. So we go into that silent space because the thought of confronting it is too scary. The thought of having to deal with somebody else's reaction. If you say, I don't like the way you spoke to me and I don't like the way that you behaved. People are so worried about that other person's reaction. And that's why, in the work I do with boundaries are very tightly linked in with approval addiction.
Oof.
You want somebody's approval and you want them to accept you, and you think that if you say no, there's my line, they're going to reject you and they're not going to like you and they're not going to approve of you. So there's a lot of work to be done around approval addiction when it comes to being able to set boundaries.
And to that point, I think one of the things I speak about in my book is I used to chase the gold stars of everyone else's validation for so long.
Everyone does.
But it doesn't serve us,
No.
because we get there and we think we've done all of these things to win that approval. It's like a dog chasing a car, and then you get it and you're like, hang on, this is not what I wanted anymore.
Yeah.
And actually I haven't held space for myself
Yes.
in that process. I've given up what's important to me. And that's why that whole thing around being centered within ourselves and saying that I'm important enough to hold space for, to hold that boundary for, is so important.
And being unapologetic in that.
Yeah.
Like just owning who you are in the world and not having to apologize for who you want to be in the world. And if you stop needing people's approval or acceptance, boundaries become really easy.
And I think that's so important, that easefulness, when you can have that centered space for yourself. And I want to pick that up in our next segment, the energy that comes with the boundaries that we set, because I think that's so important. That says that we're worth holding that boundary from a place of self-love and self-worth, rather than seeking validation or attacking back, because I think the extreme ends of that energy spectrum are where we actually then trigger the reactions, and it moves into a place of either, really giving up our power or power over another person. And I think that's so important. What is your top tip for someone going into a boundary conversation? Was that a whole nother,
That's a whole big conversation. It's you got to pick the right time.
Yeah.
You have to pick the right place, and you need to do it face to face.
Oh, so important.
Yeah.
I think that in-person conversation, because I think we use technology as a buffer to have those conversations. We hide behind it.
And it's convenient to blue tick someone, and convenient to just ghost someone, and convenient to not respond and leave somebody hanging. And you may be very clear on needing to say what you've got to say, but understand this is the first time they're hearing it. You've been prepping this conversation for weeks. You're very clear how this is going to go. They are not. So you've got to do face to face to give them the opportunity to process and to ask questions if they are unclear.
No,
because setting boundaries has to happen with clarity. You've got to be clear in your communication.
Oh, clarity is kind. And I think that's such an important topic for us to take into our next segment, when we start to look at how do we create that clarity in person, and then start to bring the right energy and language to a conversation around boundaries. Join us in the next segment.